I've been waiting a long time to tell my story. When I was about 8 years old, I was taking my dog for a walk through the neighbourhood with my mum. It was maybe 11 PM. We live next to a wood/swampy area on the edge of our neighbourhood in Michigan. I remembered it was very silent and very windy. From down in the swamp, we heard somebody whistling at us. It sort of sounded like it was a bird, but it had lack of consistency to know that it was human. The whistling sounded higher, then lower. I can't really describe it. My mum was concerned, slightly terrified looking. She grabbed my hand and said that we have to go inside quickly. I didn't understand because I was too young, but seeing my mum freak out made me scared too. After a while though, I kind of forgot about it. 2 years later, I was taking my dog out again, late in the night. Now there's a large bush that could easily obscure a person behind it next to the front door. Just as I finished walking, the whistling noise started again. It's with the same weird pitch tone and the strange inconsistencies. It sounded human-like again. As I heard it, chills immediately went down my spine as I remembered feeling the exact same feeling as seeing my mum terrified looking. I glanced down into the swamp and I couldn't see anything. I ran inside as quick as possible. Now years went by and I thought about it less and less. I only told a handful of people and eventually it slipped away from my mind. Fast forward to the last summer, I'm 24, started dating my girl Sarah. We moved out to South Dakota for work. For Independence Day, we decided to go to Pierre, SD and watch the fireworks at the bank along the Missouri River. There was a free camping spot behind a hospital where you could pitch your tent, hang out and see some of the fireworks upstream. We were near the end of the campground and there were very few people around us. As it was getting dark, the fireworks began. They were pretty far away, so the illumination they brought was very little, thus we had to sit at the very end of the river to be able to see them. At the time, there was a large electrical storm that began picking up. The atmosphere was eerie to say the very least. Now the police boats herded all the people off the river and we had to leave our area. Most of the other campers walked up to the river to see the fireworks better, but Sarah and I decided to stay back drinking. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a paddle methodically dipping into the water. We now see a figure steering a canoe about 20 meters offshore. Sarah decided to go get more beers from the car, leaving me alone to just stare at this person. And of course, they began whistling at me. My entire body froze and I got covered in goosebumps. It was the exact same whistle from my childhood, this time a decade later. I looked at the figure, but it was much too dark to see who it was. They were wearing a hat, and they were going towards me, but they suddenly stopped paddling, turned directly facing me now, not slightly side on, and began whistling. I was frightened but stood up and said, "Who are you?" And they then didn't say anything, just whistled at me, turned 180 degrees and paddled out of sight. As they began paddling away, I grabbed my camera and just managed to get shots of them as they whistled away. When Sarah came back from getting beers, she's very confused as to why I was so scared. When I explained everything, she got a bit scared too. I was convinced that we were going to get murdered that night. How did the person follow me? I mean, after 14 years, all the way to South Dakota. Was it a coincidence? Was it the same whistling noise? Who was the person and where the hell did they go? There's so many unanswered questions. To this day, I'm still afraid of going outside in the dark. I'm sure that I'm going to hear that whistling sound again. I live in a rural area about 30 minutes west of Palm Springs in California. My cousin and I decided to go on a hike in some hills that were about 20 minutes north in the area called Oakland. There was no trail to get back into the hills though. We actually had to trespass in a fire camp and follow a stream towards a hill. Now we started climbing the hills and reached the peak of a particularly steep hill. I realised that we are way away from where I parked the car. I don't even know where the road is. On top of all of that, there's a heavy fog rolling in and we only have about 35 minutes of light left. We attempt to make a shortcut down the hill by sliding on our butts down a steep slope, and to our dismay, we end up on the side of a 30-foot rock wall. Long story short, we manage to scale down the rock, but not before a football-sized boulder falls right next to my cousin's head. It catches him and he starts to bleed really heavily. It's like he's losing it and he's very disorientated. We started walking into the direction that we think the car is in. The fog is getting heavy and we're not really sure where we're going. As we're walking, we discover this 40-foot building with thick concrete walls. It was mostly set below the ground like a bunker. In the middle of the forest, though. The windows had bars on them and the steel door was very, very heavy. My cousin wanted to check it out, but I was getting a really bad vibe from it. He was saying something was drawing him in. Now, I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I wouldn't let him just jump in. I just got this super eerie feeling from it. Shortly after we passed the house, the fog let up a bit, and we luckily stumbled onto a foot trail. Now, a weird thing is, we went back a couple of weeks later during the full daylight and looked around for the place, but we literally couldn't find it anywhere. The thing is, we went to the exact spot we were at before, and it was nowhere. The other really weird thing about it is my wallet fell out of my pocket while we were sliding down the hill next to the bunker. But for some reason my ID showed up in the mail about a week later, in a clear envelope that had no writing or messages on it. That part probably creeps me out the most. About 6 years ago, when I was a college sophomore, I used to go on late night drives with a buddy of mine, Carter. He called me at around 11 PM. We'd jump in his roommate's truck, pick a highway and drive away from the city until we felt like returning. Some nights we'd be out until like 4 AM. So one night we're heading north on Highway 75, somewhere between Prosper and Gunter, Texas. We turn down this little 2-lane asphalt road. It's lined with trees and scrubby bushes. It's leading into farmland dotted by small houses. It's at around 1 AM at this point and it's dark as hell. We're far enough from the city and there wasn't much of a moon. It was there in the darkness that I noticed a broken down school bus in one of the fields just off to the side of the road. I pointed it out and we made some jokes about ghost children and axe murderers. We didn't think much of it. We then driven through a little further into the darkness with the headlights on, and we suddenly catch a big teddy bear in the middle of the road. It looks like it's been there for a while. Carter manoeuvred around it, but then there was another, and another. Suddenly, all over this tiny road, we're surrounded by nothing but trees, dirt, a haunted school bus, and a ton of teddies that look like they've been there for ages. They're in all different kinds of shapes and sizes. Now this scares the hell out of us. I yelled at Carter to get us the hell out of there. He yelled back that I'm trying. He's trying his very best to swerve the truck around them, but without a doubt he ran a few over. There were just so many. The headlights seemed to die for a second too, which just made it all the worse. I was certain at this point that we're about to be murdered, or at least that there were people waiting out there for us. We then continued down the road. It seemed to be getting darker if possible. Eventually he just floored it. I lost attention of the teddy bears. After about half an hour of driving, we finally made it out of there. No more teddy bears in sight. To this day, I still have no idea what the hell was going on that night. I'm 23 now, and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably about 14 or so. Anyway, I used to skateboard all of the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and decided to go to a 7-Eleven to go get some food and drinks before we went in. Remember, I was 14 so we weren't driving. We skated to 7-Eleven and we're planning on skating and walking back home. Anyway, we buy drinks and leave the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross a highway. While we waited there for the traffic lights to turn red so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 50-year-old man there pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He He slammed on the gas and sped straight at me and my friends. He just missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed at him. The man then sped out of the car park and right next to the lot where the 7-Eleven was. I swear to God, he actually drove through a ditch because he was going so quick. He then tried to run us over again. This is where it gets bad. The three of us started running at full speed across a highway and towards the local library, which is like 2 or 3 blocks from the 7-Eleven. When we were about half a block away, I looked back and see the maniac speeding at us again. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed and there was a trail in the woods that led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me quickly before escaping into the woods. I saw that he grabbed a shotgun. I was truly terrified at this point. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbour, Tim's dad, told me to get into his car because we had to go to the video store. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon and 3 cops. My mum then came in about a minute later crying because she didn't know if I lived or not. Everybody thought I got captured. Tim told me that they saw the guy running after me into the woods. That's the scary part for me. I thought they were getting chased by him, not me. Anyway, the guy was never caught and I spent the next 5 years of my life worrying every time I saw a truck. Whilst on a horse ride around the land of a friend's farm, we found what appeared to be the site of a death. The town we're just outside of had been the site of many gold mines in the past. Whilst out riding, we spotted a large hill and decided to appreciate the view from the top. Subsequently, we stumbled upon an abandoned mine. The mine had various levels and pockets dotted around it. It was really fun to explore. Now this was really in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by only natural bush and whatnot. So we wandered into an opening we were yet to explore and shortly come to the back of the shaft. To our left, a shaft opened and dropped well over 40 or 50 meters to the bottom of the mine. We could faintly make out the bottom in the low light. To our right was a small pit filled with stone fragments. Jumping into the pit, I was immediately struck by this really strange feeling unlike any I've ever experienced before or since. At some point I should mention that the indigenous people of this area of southern Africa believed in the power of witchcraft. I've seen firsthand how these believers can dramatically affect other people. Some refuse modern medicine to the point of death, others become froze with fear and die of it. Indeed, healthy people can die almost overnight despite being perfectly fine. Anyway, hopping into the pit, I immediately felt uneasy. Looking about, I quickly spotted a human figure made up of wood and plastic cleared onto the floor. Attached to the waist was a scrap of blue material from a worker's overall. Now I actually didn't really want to touch it. Many African superstitions believe walking over or coming into contact with such props will bring problems in the future. I can't say why, but it definitely seemed to emanate as true to me. It felt sinister. I quickly scrambled out of the pit and headed back to the sunshine. Shortly after we made it out of the mine, we gone further back to explore. We ended up at the bottom of the shaft. We had seen far from above a rather disturbing scene. Directly from where we were standing from, we could see a large dark brown stain about 6 foot wide in radius, shreds of blue material all over there, and a large chunk of what appeared to be flesh or something. We had very little light and it smelled horrible, but we were very scared by this and we ran out of there and never returned. I'm confident that this is a result of somebody being killed or disposed of. What makes my experience creepy isn't what we saw, but what we never saw. We went outside to a space cruise, which is a term for smoking pot and going on long drives. We got off the highway onto a ranch exit about 15 miles from the nearest town and climbed along a dirt road. We're trying to find access to a scenical looking cliff and spend a few hours there. After about 30 minutes of driving, we finally make it to our destination. Flash forward about 45 minutes, we're pretty stoned and have settled in now nicely. There's a break in the music as the CD changes doing its thing. I remembered thinking that the silence was pretty eerie. Suddenly, there was a really loud thump and the back of the SUV dips down like something very, very heavy has suddenly jumped on the tailgate. The interior light comes on, the indicator dashboard starts flashing that the tailgate's open. We panicked and looked around trying to see what the hell it was, but we couldn't see anything because of the interior light. I'm not sure how long we sat there trying to make sense of this before I put the car into reverse and hauled out of there. Now, we didn't see anything on the way out, but we stopped at the bottom of the mountain under the lights of the on-ramp to do an inspection. The back bumper was completely deformed. The latch on the hatchback door was completely damaged and wouldn't close anymore. Now, to this day, I still don't know what the hell hit us out there. There was literally nothing behind us. I have no clue what could have possibly caused that. When I was younger, there was this old abandoned building that's supposedly haunted. It was pretty close to where I lived. Now, my mum and dad never let me go out there because it's dangerous. Also, my dad was kind of paranoid of it. He just got this really weird vibe every time that he went there. So anyway, one day me and my friends decided to go and all investigate. Now, we did search throughout the whole place and we found it really creepy. It smelled terrible and there was abandoned shit everywhere. It was clear that this place hadn't been used from like the 60s or something. We just found it amazing. We kept hearing a clicking noise though that kind of scared us and we all bolted it out of there. Now, that's not even the scary part. We were convinced that this was just one of us playing pranks on each other, but we didn't know who it was, or maybe it was an animal. I wasn't sure. After going home, I wanted to find out just what the clicking sound was. So I snuck out at about 10 PM, made sure that I closed the door really quietly behind me and made my way over there with only a flashlight. Everything went normal until my light started flickering. As I looked up ahead of me, I swear that I saw a shadowy figure move. I went slightly deeper in, and that's when I heard a really loud scream. Now honestly, I've never heard such an inhuman scream in my life. I was in shock, so I didn't even react. But here's the scary part. All of the birds did and animals around me. I could hear the birds from the nearby trees go away as quick as they possibly could. As I went outside, I saw a fox running as well. I was still in shock at this point, so that's why I didn't run away. Suddenly though, reality hit me, and I kind of blacked out at that point, but I must have sprinted home on my own. Now, I have no idea to this day what happened in there, but the part that really terrifies me is that I didn't even react to make the birds or other animals move. They reacted and heard the same thing that I did, and I still have no explanation to this day as to what the hell it was. I know for a fact that I was the only one in there. I was driving home late one night last summer of 2015, paranoid as hell because A, I was driving with an expired license that had a medical suspension and additional suspension for an unpaid fine. B, was holding, so I'm driving extra careful as I turn my wheel. It's like 3:30 AM. I then noticed something on the side of the road, to the left, driver's side. But first my heart sinks. I don't do well with certain roadkill, but I suddenly realise that there's no way it's roadkill. Who puts their garbage bag out on non-garbage bag day? What the hell? Anyway, that all happened in maybe 2 seconds before I realised with the help of braking and headlights that it was a person on the side of the road. They have a top on and I can see that it's clearly covered in blood. Immediately I thought, I have to help. Even in my darkest junkie days, I always wanted to help people. I started to get out of the car but suddenly froze up. To this day, I can't explain it other than like an instinct or something. I then locked my door and put my high beams on. It suddenly hit me though that my parents might realise that I was out this late driving. I didn't want that to happen. I raced home. While I was driving, I quickly dialed 911. I realised as I spoke to the police that I sounded like a crazy addict or somebody pranking them, and then, as I was on the phone, standing at the edge of the driveway watching from down the street, it started moving. I cried out to the dispatcher, who asked me what was going on. I explained everything play by play as the individual moves around on the ground, gets up, moves around more, and is going towards a vantage point. I can see that they've stopped and they started facing me and are slowly walking towards me. I explain this and they don't really seem to listen to me. I then get out and walk as close as I can to my house. As I glance back, I realise that whoever this is has started running towards me. I then go as quick as I possibly can to make it through the door of my house. I'm looking back with every second. They're now stumbling around across the street. They're trying to go to the direction of my house, but they seem really disorientated. They then stumble around some more and suddenly head towards the woods. They slowly go out of sight. I then stand outside and see a police car about 10 minutes later. His attitude was kind of off-putting. He seemed to care, but really not that much. Nothing ever come of an investigation either. I still have no clue where they went or what they wanted. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night. It was about a 2-hour drive ahead of me. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back at work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either sides. The real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I'd been driving for about 45 minutes and I was starting to get really tired. You know how you suddenly get really tired suddenly? It's like out of nowhere. Yeah, that happened to me. Now I knew that I wasn't going to be able to last much longer, but I didn't come across any places I could safely park and sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull over and my tiredness was not going to go away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass and behind some bushes. I was trying to hide my car out of sight of everybody so nobody would be able to find me. So I made material note that the time was 11:22. I then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to bed. I was awoken later by the same exact sound, this time at 20:01. This time, it was really freaking me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal checking out the car, but why would it return after an hour of going away? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of somebody running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was a killer. You know, like the ones you see in films, where they slowly creep up on you and slaughter you? Yeah, screw that, I thought to myself and got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road. As I come round it, there was a car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door open. I looked to see if anybody was in there. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything. All of a sudden, the guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me to stop. I noped out of there. I never saw that guy again. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit, and I suddenly smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back to the undergrowth to have a look. I found a dead body. This guy had clearly been there for a while. He wasn't looking great, all swollen, green and black dots everywhere. The local wildlife had also been dining on him. I called the police, who told me to wait there with the body until they arrived. Now, being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive and it got dark very quickly. I just sat there. It turned out that he committed suicide. For a long time afterwards, I had dreams about him that I would talk to him and he wouldn't say nice things back. Mainly about how angry he was that I disturbed his resting place and that he wanted to kill me. Probably just my imagination, but very disturbing. When I was about 15, a friend and I went to a Catalan island for a Boy Scout trip. There's a gorgeous part of the island that's filled with cherry blossom trees and desert-like Mad Max parts. We went to the latter. The camp counsellor told us of an urban legend that circulated the whole island. There was a couple that went hiking in one of the hills and the mother fell off a cliff and straight into the ocean. She broke lots of bones and couldn't actually swim off in the water. So one night we kayaked to one of the neighbouring islands and camped there for the night. My friend woke me up in the middle of the night to ask me to go to the portables with him because he didn't want to get in trouble for breaking the buddy system. So we get to the portables and I'm waiting outside when, suddenly out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of white. I can only describe it as a middle-aged woman in a white gown looking back towards me. Her hands were waving in the air as if she is conducting an orchestra, and she seemed to be violently shaking. Now here's a weird part. It just didn't match. Her hands were moving so smoothly, and her head was shaking so violently. I was too far away to notice any of the details, but I sure as hell finished peeing myself before my friend got back for the first few moments of silence before I shouted out, "Get the hell out of here!" Pants half undone, he rushed to see what was happening and immediately ran. I looked back but saw that the woman wasn't chasing us. When we finally got back to the camp, we told the scoutmasters about what we had seen. They didn't really seem to be taking it too seriously and just told us to sleep in one of the cabins for the night. We also never returned to that island again afterwards. We backpacked to a lake about 8 miles from the trailhead. First night, it's us and another family. No biggie. They left the next day and we had the entire lake to ourselves. Now this part of the trailhead is an extremely long loop that cascades. Now, from where we are, it's about 50 miles to the next trailhead. On the second day, we're all alone while taking it and suddenly my dog starts acting up. Up in the trail, from the opposite direction we come from, there were 2 men. Their clothes were incredibly clean for having hiked at least 50 kilometers, and thus camped for a few days, and they had nothing on them but a small fanny pack. No six, no water, nothing. That word has a different meaning from where I'm from. Now my dog, who's normally extremely scared of strangers, went absolutely ape at them. I've never seen anything like him, especially not while on the trails. Now that instantly put me on edge. Now we exchanged some small talk with them, but they were just asking questions that were just not normal. Obviously something was wrong. It started normal though, like, is it just you two? How long are you guys going to be camping at the spot? Doing any shooting? Did you bring an axe, just to cut your firewood? Now my first thought would be that maybe they're growing fields nearby and were scoping us out just to make sure we're alright. The problem is though, I grew up in the bunnies, where people grow stuff all the time, and it was common enough to know that they wouldn't be stupid enough to have actually approached us or gone towards a busy trail. So the creepy vibe they given me was just totally off. They swam in the lake for about 2 hours near our campsite, which didn't even make sense since the lake is long and winding. There were plenty of private beaches too, and they could have easily just went to one of them. The weird thing was they were also watching us the whole time. They eventually wandered back into the forest though, soaking wet. That night, we saw a lantern at the far end of the lake trail that we walked upon. The lantern did get pretty close to where we were staying, but luckily it turned around, and that was the last that we ever heard or saw of them. When I was 11 years old, my great-grandmother moved in with my normal grandmother due to her age. She was older than 87 at the time. We were still in the possession of her house as it had not been put up on the market yet, so we're going through cleaning out all of her stuff. My entire family was there helping out as it is a big house that had 2 floors and a basement. Mind you, this house is located in a very, very rural area. All 6 of us cousins who are between 9 and 17 had nothing to do and tried watching TV, but there was no signal. Even with the antenna, no channels came on, so we just played outside. Now I've always noticed playing there that there was this very wide open space of land surrounded by woods. I always got this weird feeling when being there. It felt like it is miles away from anywhere else. To be fair, it kind of was. Now there was no light, nothing. When you go there, it kind of just gets dark. It was all down a road that ended in a dead end and was surrounded by no other homes. Just wilderness and woods. Now my grandfather had a hunting stand deep in the woods behind the house. He passed away about 7 years before though, so literally nobody had been there since. Now it was getting late and the sun began to set. Not dark enough to need a flashlight just yet, and being young and bored, my younger cousin and I decided to go and check it out. So we started walking towards it, and just as it started to get dark, we heard a creaking sound. We thought maybe it's a critter or something, so we continued further into the woods. As we got closer, we noticed what looked like a reflection coming from the shack. We froze and said nothing. Then, we saw a head peer out of the shack and just stare at us. We screamed so loud and ran inside. My parents asked what was wrong and we told them everything. They went out the back and found no signs of anybody out there. Now the most bizarre thing is that there was no way that anybody could get up there as there was no ladder or even a rope. My mum later told me that my great-grandfather took the ladder down so that way nobody could go up there. After graduating college, my oldest brother wanted to spend the weekend camping at Lake Berryssey outside of Napa in California. His girlfriend at the time, Shannon, said that we could use her godfather's boat, so we hitched it up and headed up the Spanish Flat to dock. The bank of this lake is surrounded by the sandy hills and rocky cliff sides. Now it's not exactly easy to climb down in some of the areas. The landscape has a lot of trees. It's a very big lake, so it's impossible to be able to see what everybody's doing around you. Now typically what people will do is tie up their boats and camp out in the banks. We then headed towards the southeast corner and found a really nice spot. We swam for about an hour or two and then had dinner. I think it must have been at around 7 or 8 PM because the sun was setting. The lake was still beautiful. Shannon suggested that we climbed up to the side of the bank and go and get some firewood, so me and my brother climbed up trying to find the best pieces. We were far enough back into the woods that we could see the boat and lights. We suddenly though heard a sharp, horrifying and echoing scream. We ran to the tree line to find Shannon, who was on the boat yelling for us. Crying and obviously really scared, we climbed down the side slowly and my brother stopped and stared onto the lake. There's something floating in the water. I looked out and saw something, slowly drifting along the shore. My brother walked towards the boat and told Shannon to come stand over by me, and then he walked to the edge of the lake and stood there quietly. Shannon ran up crying. I started to walk over to my brother and he said, "I think it's a skinned animal. It doesn't have any skin." I stood behind him and I could see it. The water was dark, but I could see some detail. It was floating chest down. There was a black garbage bag covering part of it. It was too big to be a dog or anything. It didn't have a head on it, and I couldn't see if it had arms or not. I really had no idea what the hell this was, but the fact that it was skinned was terrifying. It then drifted slowly, turning as it moved with the current. We stood there for a few minutes and didn't say anything, but I know we were both thinking, "God, please don't let that be a person." Shannon suggested that we packed up the chairs and got the hell out of there, so that's just what we did. I'd driven the boat out of there fast and I didn't really get a chance to look at it, but my brother did and looked over the edge. Shannon covered her eyes and was freaking out. We headed back to the dock at Spanish Flat. There was an office there for the park department or something, but nobody was in there. We then drove to the nearest gas station and left a note and number for the attendant to give them. We never heard anything back after this though. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening and had about 2 blocks to ride back myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk with streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe in his 40s, a little bit scruffy but not homeless. He was right upon the tree line. The sidewalk was narrow and I didn't want to freak him out, especially because he might have thought I emerged from the forest. When I got about 6 feet away from him, I said, "Hey, behind you." He then turned around and gave me this curious look. I turned down my street and he started following me. He started screaming at me about how he was about to kill me. I live right off to the corner and I didn't want him to figure out where I live. So I decided to do another loop around the block, but that's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looked back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my front doorstep, literally staring at the street like he knew where I lived. Obviously he knew I lived there. I mean shit, he was literally on my doorstep for God's sake. I knew that I had to get out of there quick. I quickly rushed over to a friend's house and he just stared at me the whole way back. As I glanced back, I think he went back to the tree line, but I'm not sure.